Half a day and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Guam Coalition's No More webinar. As you are logging in and we have opened up, you are attending the Human Trafficking Awareness and Response, and we've got our presenters standing by in the wings here to share with you the information. So please, as we get started, yes, practice and exercise your fingertips and put in the chat who's in the house so our presenters know who's in. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Cynthia Cabot with the Guam Coalition. And of course, we are using the Zoom webinar format. So as you enter, you are automatically muted and your video cameras are off. So you can go about with your, as you normally would, multitasking as we all do. So practice your fingertips on your keyboard and place in the chat. And then also in the Q&A, if you have any questions for our presenters, either post them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll be able to see your questions. You can post your questions just to the panelists or to everyone. So appreciate your sharing also. Thank you to everyone who's in the house. We want to thank all of our partners who are on. We've got folks from DOE, and of course, today's the first face-to-face for some of our students who have opted to go back to school. We have our partners from the Sanctuary, from DYA, from Catholic Social Service, from the Archdiocese of Agana. So thank you for joining us. We also have reps from the U.S. Attorney's Office. So thank you for checking in and signing in. So as we get started, just wanted to, let me put up my slide. There we go. So as you're logging in, if you've joined us for the past few sessions that we've had, you know that our handouts are posted on our website, www.guamcoalition.org. And the username is awareness. And the password is all caps HTA 2021. Just wanted to take this moment as we, before we start, to also point out that if not for funding support from the Office on Violence Against Women, as well as with Department of Health and Human Services, Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, we would not have been able to provide this webinar for you. And then too, with the support that we do receive from all of our partners for being on as presenters, we want to thank you for providing us the opportunity to share the information with all of our partners on island. We also have partners coming in from Saipan and from American Samoa, from Chuuk, from Pohnpei. So we have quite a following here. Just wanted to remind you all, continuing education units, so long as you've been attending since day one, you are eligible to obtain 1 credit CEU. You have to contact the University of Guam directly for that. And information is posted as well as available on our website. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to try to factor in some break in between. I know for those of you who joined us yesterday, we went full on nonstop, and we even went over our 11:30 time. So thank you to those of you who stayed from 9 to, I think it was nearly noon when we ended yesterday. Well, today we'll try to keep as close to schedule as possible. We've got Alex Delgado with the U.S. Committee on Refugee and Immigrants talking to us about Human Trafficking 101. We have Laurie Ogumoro with the Caridad Social Services. We'll have Emiliana Musrasrik Carl sharing information of what they're doing in Pohnpei, and Kiki Stinet sharing from Chuk, and we've got Judy Matautia from American Samoa. So we do appreciate their joining us and providing information for us this morning. So just want to remind you, yes, I've just gotten a note that today is day 4 of our 4-day conference. Just to remind you to please complete the evaluation. We will post it on the link on our website, but it is actually a Survey Monkey link, and you'll be able to have access to that. Actually, Zoom will send you a reminder to say, please don't forget to fill in the corresponding evaluation for this. So before we start, I know today's day 4 of our Human Trafficking Awareness and Response webinar, but we want to also let you know that behind the scenes, we are working feverishly to bring to you then our next webinar series for February, and that will be identifying and responding to stalking. So you have a brief overview of the topics for the day. It will be from February 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the first week in February, Tuesday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. tomorrow Standard Time. So you'll be able to, we have the registration all set up. We will be posting the Register Today flyer on our website. So look out for that. We hope to get that out before end of day. But just wanted to give you a heads up on that. So you'll certainly be able to plan and join us again for that. We are working with UOG again to be able to provide CEUs for our stalking webinar. And mind you, January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Awareness Month. It is also Stalking Awareness Month. So hence, with all of our training this month, we wanted to give you a break and provide our stalking webinar the first week in February. So we've got our team ready to go. And I'm just looking at the time. We're a little bit early, like 3 minutes early, or maybe even more than that, 5 minutes early. But I just wanted to give some time to introduce our speaker, and he'll do more of an introduction on his background. But just wanted to point out that the U.S. Committee, hold on, let me get this thing going. Just wanted to point out that the United States Committee for Refugees and Immigrants is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. And this organization works to protect the rights and address the needs of persons in forced or voluntary migration worldwide and support the transition to a dignified life. The USCRI administers the Trafficking Victims Assistance Program and contracts over 200 providers across the US and US territories. If you were on board, if you were on the webinar yesterday, you would have heard Alex Delgado speaking about it. So now I'm going to call on Alex if he can join us.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for having me here today.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us again. I know it's your afternoon and you're probably watching or perhaps listening in to the inauguration that's going on in your neighborhood.
Yes, it's been a very exciting day here in DC with everything that's going on, and a very happy day for many of us, I'm sure. Um, and I'm ready to get started to talk about Human Trafficking 101. And let me share my screen for everyone. To tell you a little bit more about myself, like I said yesterday, I work at the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. I'm the program officer for Region 9, which oversees the administration of the Trafficking Victim Assistance Program in the Pacific Island territories of Guam, American Samoa, and CNMI. And a big part of my job is doing this um, trainings and assisting organizations that are on the ground who are doing this work with building up their programs, with how to deal with difficult cases, and also being the intermediary between the government and some of the government offices like OTIP, um, HHS, and you all on the ground so that we can assist with public benefits to those that are available in the islands, social security numbers, and things like that. And so human trafficking 101, to get started, I'm going to kind of go into the technical details, the definitions of what we talk about um, when we are talking when we're learning about human trafficking. Um, and these are going to be the definitions that are in the US and how the US in, defines human trafficking. And I think it's important to start first with the Palermo Protocol, which was first initiated in 2000 and then later ratified again in 2005, which gave for the first time ever a universally agreed definition of trafficking in persons. Of course, trafficking has been going on way before the year 2000, but this was the first time, I think it was around 120 countries came together to agree on a definition on what it means, how to define trafficking in persons, which is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Um, it is a very long definition for trafficking in persons, and there's a lot into it, which we'll break down. But I think some of the key things I wanted everyone to take away from this definition is the abuse of power or of a position of vulnerability, um, and also the fraud and deception and coercion part of it. A lot of people usually, when they think of trafficking, they think a lot about the physical or the force portion of it. If you Google human trafficking, right, you'll see pictures of maybe people tied up, um, people with bruises, and while that, of course, is very common and does happen, a lot of other portions of it is that coercion and fraud that is not as visible, and which oftentimes then causes many survivors to go unnoticed and end up them not being able to receive assistance because people are not are not looking at that coercion and fraud or deception. So the Palermo Protocol is the most broad definition of trafficking in persons. Um, later in 2000, the U.S. ratified the Trafficking Victim Protection Act, which was the first federal comprehensive legislation that addressed human trafficking in the U.S. It created the Teen Non-Immigrant Visa, or Teen Non-Immigrant status for foreign national victims, which is a way for foreign national survivors um, in the U.S. Um, to I think my in has my screen my slides been changing this whole time, Cynthia? I think it just told me it
It,
wasn't for a second.
it was.
Oh, it
now
was okay.
you're now you're in your notes slides.
Oh, sorry. Here we go. Okay, I think I pressed something. Um, as I was saying, it created the Teen Non-Immigrant Visa status for foreign national victims, which is for those who are not from the US, so anyone who's not a legal permanent resident or a US citizen or asylee or refugee, those who come here undocumented or through the J1 visas, the H1B visas, those work visas. It gave them a path to be able to get a green card and citizenship. It also strengthened the ability of law enforcement agencies to investigate and prosecute human trafficking, and offer protection and services to foreign national victims, that being the Trafficking Victim Assistance Program that the USCI administers to the country. So it gave some funding for organizations to be able to serve the survivors um, of human trafficking. So when we talk about human trafficking, we break it up into sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Sex trafficking being the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which the commercial act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. And labor trafficking, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjugation to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So again, um, we're going to be I'll be breaking down all of the portions of these definitions for sex trafficking and labor trafficking. But this is what constitutes someone to be a victim of a severe form of human trafficking in the US. So when we talk about human trafficking and we look at the definition, we break it up into an acts, means, and purpose model. And there's one for labor trafficking, which labor trafficking and sex trafficking, which are very similar. Sex trafficking includes patronizing or solicitation. And for sex trafficking, minors do not, there's no need to show force, fraud, there does not need to be force, fraud, or coercion for them to be considered a victim of human trafficking. There is some argument that it should be the same for minors that are in labor trafficking situations, since they are minors, but at this time, minors who are victims of labor trafficking do need to show force, fraud, or coercion. And so the act, if you're looking at the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining of, is how they came to be in the situation. The means is how they were forced through I use the word force, which is also in the definition, but force, fraud, or coercion, like how they were induced into either doing the labor or the commercial sex act. So I'm not going to go through each definition, and I did share the PowerPoint with Cynthia, and hopefully maybe we can share it with you all for you all to have after the webinar, so you can look closely at the definition. But when we're classifying and identifying victims of human trafficking, these are kind of the situations and that we want to look out for when we want to classify someone as a victim of human trafficking: the recruitment, transportation, soliciting, patronizing, harboring, obtaining, provision. Something that I think a lot of people wrongly attribute to human trafficking is that there needs to be some form of transportation. Transportation is a part, can be an action, and sometimes is a part of what happens in human trafficking, but it is not something that is that has to be shown. Many victims of human trafficking are not transported anywhere. It can happen in their own homes, in their own communities. They're not necessarily have to be brought from one place to another for the trafficking to occur. So if you look at all of these words, some of them like harboring, obtaining, right? Someone was taken or someone was given to someone for them to have control over them. Recruitment, which is that someone used their vulnerabilities, the victim's vulnerabilities against them for the purpose of exploitation. Or patronizing, soliciting, only used for sex trafficking, which is that they were offered or promised money in exchange for a sex act. Um, so once you have one of these elements, then we go towards the means, which is how they were induced into the situation. And we look at it in three ways, with either there being an element of force, coercion, or fraud. And again, like I said before, force is usually the first thing that people think of when they think about human trafficking, that physical assault, that sexual assault, physical confinement. And while again, that's very much present in human trafficking situations, there does not need to be force for human trafficking to occur. Um, some things that people don't think about are that coercion or fraud part of the these situations, and very much like domestic violence. Sometimes people ask, well, why didn't they just leave? And this time, there's a lot. You see this a lot with maybe people who continue to work in massage parlors, or continue to work for an employer, despite them, uh, you know, despite them not being handcuffed to where they are, or constantly monitored. Um, some people, you'll hear people say, like again, like in domestic violence, you'll hear them say, why didn't they just leave the doors wide open? They can just walk out. And of course, it's not that simple. Um, that coercion and fraud part is really what you'll see a lot of in human trafficking situations. That fear that they're going to be harmed, their family members are going to be harmed, the withholding of legal documents, that if they don't have their passport or they don't have um, immigration status in the US, that they'll be deported. That's a very big part of a very big issue with undocumented victims of human trafficking, that the traffickers will say, well, if you don't stay, then you'll be deported and forced to go back home. And many people who have traveled to the US because of fear um, of death and because of gangs or extreme poverty in their countries, um, don't don't want to go, don't want to be repatriated, because it could be very dangerous, more dangerous than their situation now. Um, and so that would be the coercion, um, and then the fraud being that they were promised something. They were promised. A lot of times you see this with the victims of human trafficking that are brought over to the U.S. and told that um, they would be working a certain type of job, and then they get here and um, that job doesn't exist. They'll either be forced into prostitution, or they'll be forced to work hours that was never agreed upon, uh, supposed to work on um, in a field that they were never told that they had to do. So all of this can be a means in how they are induced into doing that labor or sex acts. So moving on from the acts and the means, we have the purpose, and this is the uh, how they got into the situation, how were they induced, and for what reason were they induced. Um, for labor trafficking, there is some form of labor, but we break it down into debt bondage, peonage, or involuntary servitude, which also includes involuntary sexual servitude. Um, in cases where involuntary sexual servitude being in cases where there is no exchange of money or something of value, but they're forced to do sex acts for the person, and so we call that involuntary sexual servitude. Um, a lot of us, I think, are mostly familiar with that Commercial Sex Act, that or prostitution, forced prostitution, which would be human trafficking, um, in which they were given something of value. A lot of times people think that something of value is um, money, cash, but when we talk about human trafficking, it's important to remember that, and I think the reason why this is vague is so that we can take into account things like food, housing. All of those things are something of value to the person. We see this a lot with some of our homeless LGBTQ youth who are forced into doing commercial sex acts in exchange for something to eat or a place to stay. Anything that can be considered, does not have to be necessarily expensive. Um, Anything that is exchanged that has something of value would be considered a commercial sex act. Um, so if you look at, so if you have something that is an acts, a means, if there's one of the elements of an action, a means in a commercial sex act, then that is sex trafficking. If you have elements of action, one of these elements of action, one of these elements of means, and then you have the purposes either for involuntary servitude, debt bondage, peonage, or slavery, then you have labor trafficking. And involuntary servitude would be um, any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that if they did not continue doing a labor, they would be harmed or um, would suffer some kind of consequences. Debt bondage is where there is an ongoing debt. We see this a lot with um, people who pay to be brought into the country or pay someone to help them come to the U.S. Um, and they'll say that, well, you owe $10,000 because I helped you come to the U.S. and you have to work off this debt. And then there are continued to that debt continues to grow, and they're forced to continue working for them because they will be harmed. They believe that they're gonna be harmed if they don't pay for it. Their family members might be harmed. Um, and then slavery, which I think is what we think about, where basically a person um, is under the full control of someone else. And most of the time, we'll see either um, we don't slavery would be something that's kind of a little bit more obvious, and at that point, involuntary servitude, debt bondage, or peonage would also be proven before you get to slavery. Um, but it would be right anything the full control of someone else, and that having them then have no freedom or will to uh, in what they are able to do during the day or night, when to sleep and things like that. So once you have, once you're able to kind of fit someone's definitions into an acts, once you're able to fit um, a survivor's experience into an acts and means purpose model, and then you're able to kind of say that this is a human trafficking situation. Of course, when you're working with survivors, or when you come across someone you think is a survivor, you're not going through a list and thinking, is this recruitment? Is this coercion? Is this fraud? Um, it it's We'll be doing the application of what this means later on in the webinar, but I think it's important to kind of get those technical definitions of what it means to be a victim of human trafficking defined under the law. Um, if you're a minor, like I said before, you do not need to prove force, fraud, or coercion um, for sex trafficking, simply because by virtue of them being a minor, they are not able to consent. So those do not need to be proven. So any minor, there does not need to be any force, fraud, or coercion. As long as you have that actions and purpose, then they are considered a victim of human trafficking. I included the email and phone number and website for the child trafficking, the child protection specialist. If you ever suspect that a minor might be a victim of human trafficking, these are the people that you contact. They're very responsive. I know you heard from OTIP yesterday, the Office on Trafficking in Persons, and they're a great resource to have. If you go onto their website, you'll be able to kind of learn a little bit more about what it means, how to work with minor victims of human trafficking, and how to identify minor victims of human trafficking. Um, they also have monthly webinars. The next one is February 3rd from 2 to 4. It might be a little early for you all, considering that I think it would probably means that it would start at 5 a.m. for some of you. But they are, if you email them and that's something that you want to participate in, or maybe you want to have something, a webinar for your organization or your community, then I definitely encourage you all to email the child trafficking email to talk to them to see if they could do a webinar for you all um, a little bit later so that you all can attend. Something again, like I was saying before, there's a big difference between human trafficking and smuggling. A lot of people have that image of someone being transported, either transported across the border or transported to a certain location. Um, a person does not need to be transported to be a victim of human trafficking. So it is, I think, for some of you who are providers, it's very important for you to be able to understand these definitions and these red flags and indicators for trafficking. Um, as some of the TWAP service providers, some of whom are on the call and are TWAP providers, it's very important to be able to identify these red flags and indicators to be able to enroll them into our program. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of an attorney or law enforcement to make the definitive determination of whether someone's a survivor of human trafficking under the law. But you as community members can make that determination yourselves to be able to then um, refer someone to services so they can get the help. I don't think anyone needs, you don't have to be an attorney or law enforcement to to be able to make those referrals and to be able to identify what's going on in your community and identify survivors in your community who may be experiencing human trafficking. And so we always really encourage everyone to learn a little bit more about the action, means, and purposes and how to identify human trafficking. And you want to think of trafficking as something similar to the power and control wheel. Something I said early on with the Palermo Protocol is that abuse of power. And if you break it down, it's that abuse of power, that control over someone, either through the coercion, the force, the fraud, is someone in a position of power who is abusing that power to induce the person to either do labor services or sex acts, which ends up being that labor or sex trafficking. I know many of you who may be doing the domestic violence work are familiar with the power control wheel. So I think this is another great way to visualize human trafficking, especially because human trafficking sometimes can look a lot like domestic violence. Um, we see this a lot in a lot of cases um, where um, it's either a boyfriend or a husband who's forcing someone into prostitution, um, or they're saying that, oh, I'll marry you, um, and they'll bring someone over to the country under the disguise of marriage, when it ends up being really that they'll be putting them through the commercial sex industry. Um, Family members either forcing minors or adults to do labor services without being paid, or very little pay. So a lot of times you'll do see human trafficking as a form of domestic violence. So who are survivors? Survivors can be of any age, educational background, um, diverse national origins and cultures, socioeconomic statuses, involuntary, voluntary migrants, citizens, lawful permanent residents, male, female, gender non-binary, adults, minors, anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. So I definitely always say that, you know, if you have any assumptions of what a victim of human trafficking is, definitely get rid of those assumptions because anyone can be a victim of human trafficking. I used to work as a case manager in New York City, and I had survivors that had master's degrees. There are survivors that were teachers. There are survivors that come from every country, speak every language, and there's no set like person who is a survivor of human trafficking. Of course, there are populations that experience greater vulnerabilities to human trafficking. Racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ individuals, migrant workers, um, those with a history of substance abuse, low income, those who are homeless, anything that puts someone in a position where someone um, can abuse their power or their position of power over someone is really what causes there to be a greater vulnerability amongst these groups. So again, survivors come from everywhere, the US and abroad. TVEP has specifically served in 2019 1,012 survivors from 77 countries. Um, and so we're seeing survivors come from all over the world, of every gender, of every type of trafficking. I do want to point out that labor trafficking we see as the biggest percentage of human trafficking. A lot of times people focus on that sex trafficking piece of human trafficking, and it is very prevalent, and of course it happens, but labor trafficking sometimes gets ignored in the conversation, and it's a very big problem with law enforcement. They also focus on sex trafficking, and not so much labor trafficking. So there's a very big push to to make sure that people are aware that labor trafficking does occur and is occurring at very high rates. And same with gender, male, female, transgender, genderqueer. Um, any gender can be a victim of human trafficking. So where does it occur? It can occur anywhere. Human trafficking really, unfortunately, has no bounds. In the hospitality industry, there are big cases where um, hotels are trafficking their staff, their cleaning staff. Um, there could be restaurants, the cooks, construction, education. There's lots of cases of teachers coming from abroad with work visas, the J1 visas, the H1B visas to work in the U.S. and teachers end up being trafficked. You see it in the education industry, construction, um, domestic servitude. People who are forced to do the work around someone's house and they're forced to perform those labor services. And then, of course, some of the ones that a lot of people think of, the strip clubs, massage parlors, and over the internet, social media, through advertisements. I think we've all heard about Craigslist and Backpage before those were taken down, and where we saw a lot of human trafficking over the internet. So identifying survivors of trafficking, um, they can appear at any time, at any place. And so when you kind of want to take the action, means, and purpose and um, look at it in the lens of your community, both culturally, linguistically, um, and frame it in a way that fits what's going on around you all. I think most specifically, I think um, what was said yesterday, for those that recall, from Jennifer and Judy from the American Samoa Alliance. Human trafficking is going to look different in each community. So it's not going to be human trafficking is not going to look the same everywhere. It's and so you have to look at it especially when identifying survivors, you want to look at it through that cultural lens. And for those of you who are maybe in homeless shelters, working in social service agencies, domestic violence shelters, emergency rooms, schools, um, you can all be becoming in contact with survivors of trafficking at some point, and you probably already have come in contact with someone who is a victim of human trafficking, which is why that identification piece is so important, and trying to understand kind of the what is human trafficking and trying to get those assumptions out of your head and into being able to see those invisible aspects of it, like that fraud and coercion. Even if you don't work in schools or homeless shelters, um, even in your communities, you would, you probably do have someone who is a victim of human trafficking because it happens everywhere. And of course, if you um, and survivors are also identified through the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which I'll give the number later on, but that's the number you would call if you do suspect someone is a victim of human trafficking. So as I was saying, there is no one size fits all approach to identifying survivors of human trafficking. Um, I wish it was that easy, and then I can give you just a template on how to identify survivors. Um, because you have to take culture, race, nationality, sexual orientation, gender, and the type of trafficking into account um, when trying to identify human trafficking and when trying to identify human trafficking in your communities. Because, like I said before, it's how survivors present themselves, how they act, what's going on behind closed doors is all going to be very different. Here's the link. I put the link to the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Center's guide to supporting victims of human trafficking and identifying victims of human trafficking. I know they spoke yesterday, and they're a wonderful resources for identification of survivors of human trafficking. So I definitely suggest you all look into that more, and they can give you a very much more in-depth training and assistance that can much more in depth that can fit in an hour. Because I think for many of the panelists here and the people who have been working with survivors of human trafficking, right, this is not something that is very hard to learn in just 1 hour. Um, but again, I mean, it's always great to be able to kind of take these first steps with these human trafficking 101 trainings, to be able to open your minds about, how human trafficking is happening in your communities. It's happened before and it's happening now, and it's happening to many different types of people. Um, and so what the first part in identifying victims of human trafficking is building trust. I don't think anyone here has had someone come up to them and say, "Help me, I'm a victim of human trafficking." That rarely, if ever, happens. How would it feel telling a stranger, your most traumatic experiences? It's not going to be something that's going to be um, something that you're going to want to do. And why should they trust you if they don't know you? And so something that I always emphasize is building trust with the person, someone who you may think is who may be a victim. I think yesterday we also heard from um, the Salvation Army and how they would be going into the massage parlors and praying and giving them um, food. And that's building trust. Someone is not going to come right away and say, I need help. And because of the variety of reasons that we talked about, that coercion or that fraud, um, that force, they're scared for their lives, they're scared that they might be deported, they're scared their families in dangers. And so creating that trust is very key when doing this work. Making sure that you always say that, if you do work with an organization, that you're ensuring privacy and confidentiality, or just in general, ensuring privacy and confidentiality, that you're not going to reveal the information to somebody else, creating a safe space, a space that's open and non-threatening, and um, adapting your screening process to accommodate the person's individual needs. If you are going into the community and are going to do screenings, making sure that you're taking into account the culture, the person's ability to do the screening. Um, for those who have disabilities, you want to be able to reach them in a way that that you're that they can communicate with you, and that you're able to talk to them in a way that they're able to understand. So why language is very, very key, and being able to either have a translator available is very important. Um, and then you're going to want to look for red flags um, through, um, these are just some examples that I put up um, about some of the red flags that you might see when when you come in contact with someone who's possibly a victim of human trafficking. There's going to be so many barriers to identification to begin with. Um, and so you should not rely simply on a checklist to make a determination. Um, and there's many, many reasons why someone would not disclose information or what's going on in their lives. I did link the NTAG's Adult Human Trafficking Screening Tool. I would definitely suggest looking at that and contacting NTAC if that's something that you do want to use in your organizations or in your communities, to be able to properly be trained on how to use it. Um, but I think sometimes instinctually you're going to know that something is wrong. I think for anybody who's maybe done any type of work related to sexual assault or domestic violence, um, you know when something is going wrong. Um, but some of the big red flags that we see all the times are lack of identification, physical abuse, constantly being followed by someone and they're not allowed to be left alone. They're not being paid for their work, signs of exhaustion, um, domestic violence. Again, this is not a comprehensive list of red flags, but just some of the things that we see all the time. And then you kind of want to do some safety planning. Some of you who may be familiar with safety planning, if you ever do come in contact with someone that you do believe is a victim of human trafficking, um, you don't want to, of course, um, just you know pull them into a car and take them to a service provider and tell them that you're going to get them help. Sometimes it's a long process, um, and what is very key here is that the survivor is in control of the situation, that they're the ones who are reaching out for help and accepting the help. Um, right? Don't push them or force them into anything, because self-determination is very important, especially when you're working with a population or a group of people whose autonomy has been taken away from them. And so you want to make sure that you're always giving them the ability to decide things for themselves. And which sometimes can be very frustrating, because sometimes you want to help someone and you want to make sure that they're going and getting help, and sometimes people are just not ready. But you want to make sure that you're always giving them room to make that determinations themselves. And I think the other key part of this is giving them your contact information, making sure that they know when and how they can reach out in case they ever do need help. Um, Providing alternatives if they don't have access to a phone or a computer. Many survivors of many victims of human trafficking might not have a phone or a computer to be able to call and reach out for help. So other ways that they might be able um, to come into your organization and ask for help if they ever decide that's what they want. But of course, just being supportive, empathetic, and building trust um, is the most important part of it all, so that they can know that you're someone that will be able to help them, especially if they're they've been harmed. Um, they're harmed. They've experienced something that's very traumatic. The trust part is not going to that's not going to come easy. So it does take work. Um, and I think I said something before is that there's lots of barriers to identification of human trafficking. Sometimes it is a hidden crime, something that's not um, happening out in the daylight. A lot of people have been coached by the traffickers. A lot of times they're charged as offenders. Um, those who are being forced into sex trafficking may be charged as maybe charged for prostitution when really you're charging someone who is being forced into that situation and they're not doing it willingly. Um, and so they're not seen. They end up not being seen as victims, but they end up being seen as perpetrators of a crime. Um, or they're sometimes identified as crimes as victims of other crimes. But aside from this, is there's also um, people sometimes don't know that they're victims of human trafficking. They don't know that that's what their experience is, um, depending on maybe culturally or something that they've experienced for such a long time that they don't really know that there isn't another um, that what's happening to them isn't right. So they might not identify as victims. Um, And there are some specific barriers, especially with immigrant survivors, fear of deportation, um, language and economic barriers, lack of protection going in home country, misinformation from their traffickers about their rights and services. Um, if their trafficker knows that they're undocumented, they'll, saying that they're going to call ICE is a big way to bring fear into their lives, and so that they'll either continue being in doing the labor or prostitution. And so there's all of these barriers are what cause a lot of victims to go on to not be able to be identified and not be able to receive services or help. Um, and so again, uh, just being able to provide um, any kind of assistance and any kind of support is going to go a very long way, um, because we want people to be able to identify survivors in their communities and be able to connect them to services. Um, and like I said before, it's all about self-determination. If you do think someone's a victim of human trafficking, calling the National Human Trafficking Hotline is key. You'd never want to put someone in a position of danger. You don't want to rush in there and try to be a savior, because a lot of these times these people you know that's not what they need. They don't need a savior. They need support. And you know they don't need to be a lot of times people go into this thinking that they want to rescue individuals, and that's not what this is about. It's not about rescuing anyone. It's about being able to provide assistance and alternatives to what's going on. Um, so I do want to keep that in mind if you do ever come across someone who is a survivor of human trafficking. Um, this is just domestic. Well, sometimes we do talk about the difference between foreign and domestic survivors of human trafficking. Domestic survivors of human trafficking, be either those that are U.S. citizens, whether they're born in the US or not, or lawful permanent residents, and for national survivors of human trafficking, which is that they do not have those citizenship or lawful permanent residence. And it might determine what assistance that they may be able to help. And it's also good to understand, again, those barriers that they are for a national survivor, um, those barriers that come with being an immigrant in this country that we had just talked about previously in the previous slide. Um, very briefly, I know don't want to go over time. For those who are undocumented, or are here on under like a J1 visa or an H1B, those temporary work visas in the US, if they have experienced trafficking, there is immigration relief available for those individuals. That's called a non-immigrant status, which allows the person to remain in the US for 4 years, to receive employment authorization, and then be able to apply for that lawful permanent residency or green card. It's unfortunately a long process, and a journey to be able to finally get that non-immigrant status and be able to help them get an employment authorization document, because unfortunately many foreign national victims are stuck in a waiting period where they're not able to work legally, and they have to a lot of times find work under the table, which then could lead to further exploitation. But there is, once they do finally get a non-immigrant status, they are able to get employment authorization. Um, hopefully, with what's going on, hopefully with this new administration, it might not over the times for non-immigrant status might become less. So we're all really crossing our fingers here that it's not taking 2.5 years anymore. Um, but maybe go back to that. It used to take 6 months when I started doing this work, and now it's 2 years. So hopefully things will look up. If there's ever a foreign national victim that you may be working with, that is also working with law enforcement, they are eligible for continued presence. It's always important that you're just aware that this is something that the law enforcement, specifically federal law enforcement, so HSI and FBI, are able to give. But if they're working with local law enforcement, either state or at the city level, um, federal law enforcement, HSI, or the FBI are able to, um, what's the word I'm thinking of, are able to work with with the local law enforcement to give them that continued presence. So they don't necessarily need to be working with the FBI or Homeland Security investigations to get continued presence, if if they ever if they are participating in a case that's local, they might be able to get continued presence. Um, Once a foreign national victim does get a non-immigrant status or continued presence, they can get a certification letter, which makes them eligible for any federal benefits um, that may be available in the community. I know there are unfortunately not all the federal benefits that are available in the states are available in the territories. So depending on what's available in your community, those who are certified are able to get anything that basically comes from the federal government that receives any federal funding. Um, Pre-certified is just anyone who does not have that certification yet. So it's probably that waiting period when they've been identified and um, been and are waiting to hear back about their G visa. Um, there's a benefit. So here you have the number for the National Human Trafficking Hotline, a great resource if you do suspect someone is um, a victim in your community. A number that you can give to someone if you. We always tell people to memorize it in case you ever do find someone, and you can just write it down in a piece of paper and tell them that they can call this number. Um, It's a 24/7 operation. Every day of the year, there's someone who's going to answer. And again, please, the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance um, is a great resource if you want to go in deeper into any of the topics that I just talked about. I really scratched the surface um, in with human trafficking. There's so much more to learn if you're starting out in this field. So they're
Social
a great resource.
services. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think for the last, I think I have another few minutes left. And I
I'm
always want to
sorry,
touch
what was
about
that?
trauma-informed care and talk about the trauma that people are facing and the trauma that the many survivors face, and that if you ever do come in contact with a survivor, that how that trauma might manifest itself in your interactions with them, and also how that trauma will affect you, because there's secondary trauma which affects us all when we hear or witness something traumatic that's happened to someone else. That's what we call that secondary trauma. I think caregiver fatigue, I think, is another name for the people use. Um, but right, trauma is something, an experience that has been physically or emotionally or life-threatening harmful to someone that's going to affect them either acutely or long-term. And every person is going to respond to a traumatic experience very differently. Um, and sometimes people have an idea of how a victim of human trafficking should be, you know, um, and that's when a lot of the barriers to identifying human trafficking survivors are, is the person has substance abuse issues because of their trauma, or they're combative and they don't want to talk to you, or they don't want to accept services, and they are saying, um, and they're, sometimes we say that they're being difficult, but I always said that there's no difficult people, they're difficult situations. And so we always want to take the trauma into account and look at everything through a trauma informed lens, um, because we don't know what's happened to this person. We don't know their experience, and how they're going to respond to 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 you, or to your services, or to anyone. So it's very important to take all of this into account. That acute trauma, that chronic trauma, that complex trauma, it's all going to manifest itself. And so some of the signs of this trauma are going to be that hypervigilance, um, that somatic symptoms of like your heartbeat racing and sweating, um, not being able to remember things. I think that's something that a lot of people forget when it comes to trauma, when people are not remembering what happened to them. And a lot of people then assume that they may be lying or something because they don't have, they can't quite remember um, their experience. And so it's always important to remember that sometimes people are not lying. It's just really a symptom of trauma that may have occurred because of the human trafficking. Um, and so to kind of give that definition of that trauma-informed care and that trauma-informed lens, is a system that approach that recognizes how trauma impacts the client and ensures safety in all interactions in physical spaces to avoid re-traumatizing that client. As some people who want to help, we never want to create further harm to the individual. Um, and we never want to place any blame, right? We want to make sure that you're working alongside the person, that they are, as we always say, they're an expert on their own lives, and they're an expert on what they need. Um, and so never trying to be a savior or rescue anyone, but really, I always think of when I was a case manager and I was working with survivors, I always think of it as a journey. where you go on with the survivor and you're walking alongside them. You're giving them the tools to be able to succeed. You're giving them options, and um, you're not creating further harm by trying to force um, force services, or um, force them to make certain decisions about their lives just because you think something may not be um, safe or right. Um, so again, through that system, or when you want to talk about doing a trauma-informed approach, you want to realize the impact of that trauma, recognize the signs and symptoms, and respond to it appropriately by having policies and procedures and practices in place um, that will not create that further re-traumatization. So really making sure that you have safety, trustworthiness, transparency, never lying or promising anything to a survivor um, when you might not be able to do it, because then if possible, peer support. Again, this is collaboration that you do with the client. You're not choosing things for them, but you're allowing them, you're empowering their voices and choices, and making sure that you have that cultural, historical understanding, understanding about whether uh, gender issues. I think I would also put in here for those who are LGBTQ, understanding what it means for them to have that experience, for to be able to something that I'm trying to be better about, and I always forget, is sharing my pronouns. But doing something like that for LGBTQ survivors, sharing your pronouns. My pronouns are he, him, his. Um, so just so the way that they can understand that this is again a safe space. And one of the main groups of people I work with is LGBTQ individuals. So it's a journey being it's a journey, I always say, being an ally, especially when working with individuals that um, face systemic discrimination. Um, that you want to that being an ally is a journey, not a destination. It's something that you have to continuously work on. Um, and this is the road to a trauma-informed care. And really, again, it all boils down to that addressing, um, making sure that you have policies in place to be able to react appropriately to a survivor's trauma. Um, and also, again, making sure that service providers, for those who are service providers on the call, or for those who just want to help, that trauma-informed care also um, is important in our work as people who may be identifying or working with survivors, that we want to make sure that we're addressing our secondary trauma and our traumas appropriately as well, because that can also play a big part in how we end up working with survivors. That fatigue is very real. I think people who have been working in this field for a while know what I'm talking about when um, that that secondary trauma is very real, and it affects us, and then it could also affect our clients. I did If you do want to learn more about trauma-informed care and how to create those policies and procedures for your organization, Project Trust, which is part of USCRI, um, they have a lot of resources available. I linked there. They have a whole webinar just on trauma-informed care, and they can also, just like NTAC, they also provide their training, their technical and training a resource funded by OVC, but really any organization who may be working with survivors of human trafficking can contact them to be able to talk a little bit more about um, a trauma-informed care and how you can implement that in your organization. Um, and that was it. Does anyone have any questions? Please, I'm always happy to answer anything. Um, if anyone wants me to um, go further into detail about anything I just talked about, feel free to put in the Q&A. I think before I close this, I should have, this here is my contact information. Um, you can always feel free to give me a call or send me an email at adelgado@uscrimail.org. Um, or we also have our general trafficking email, victims at uscridc.org. If you have any questions about this PowerPoint, I'm also very much happy to do a presentation um, for any of you, any community members or any of your organizations, or if you want me to go deeper into anything that I just talked about, I'm always welcome. I'm always happy to talk to you all. Um, my job is to support anyone doing this work. Um, I may have been doing human trafficking for a very long time, but um, I'm not in your communities. I'm not in Guam. I'm not in America Samoa. I'm not in CNMI. I think you all are really the experts in what's going on in your community, and what I can do is really just help being able to transfer kind of those definitions that I gave about human trafficking and the what I was talking about trauma informed care and how to apply it to your communities and to what's going on in the territories, um, because I can't say what's going on specifically because again I don't live there. I'm not part of that community. I think you all are experts in your communities, and you all are all really the perfect people to be able to identify trafficking um, in your communities. So thank you so much everyone for listening to me talk for the last hour. Um,
And actually, Alex, if I can ask, someone private messaged me, and it's a hypothetical situation.
mhm,
Being that to qualify, as the coalition is continues to work with you to implement the uh, to be a TVET provider and support that here on Guam.
mhm,
The question was being that it's primarily for foreign nationals.
mhm.
So hypothetically, if someone from the neighboring islands is trying to work with someone who is a traffic or an identified traffic victim, can they send them to us so we can service them here and they will qualify here? Or
Um, if
so
if if they are from the compact nations of Palau, Micronesia, and Palau, Micronesia,
Marshall
and
Islands.
Marshall Islands, sorry, um, you if they're in the island, they're kind of considered foreign nationals, so you could serve them. Um, if they're able to travel to the territory, then yeah, of course, you would be able to serve those clients. Um, I guess I wouldn't know exactly what it would mean for someone outside of the compact nations to come to the territory, but anyone from any of the surrounding islands who, again, is not a citizen or um, a legal permanent resident, then they would qualify for these services. And if um, if I can also definitely help connect you all to OVC if there are any domestic clients, so any of the residents of or and nationals from the territories, to be able to see how we can assist those individuals as well.
Okay, so just to clarify, the traffic situation does not have to occur on Guam, but if they are on Guam and can certify or show that they are trafficked from, say, another island nation, we will be able to support them.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, if the So the trafficking would have had to happen either in the compact nations, in the territories, or in the U.S. states um,
Okay.
for TVAP specifically.
Okay. Okay. But then we would be able to, if they come to Guam, we would be able to support them through TVAP.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
you would be able to support them through TVAP. The only exception for that is minors, anyone under 18. Um, the trafficking could have happened anywhere. It doesn't have to
Okay.
happen in the compact nations, in the territories, or in the states. If it happened in abroad in any country or any really any part of the world, any if it happened anywhere, the minors are able to receive the services. Yes.
Do you have any other TVAP providers in our region?
So we work very closely with Carda, with Lori, who I know speaking later,
Yes.
and we work very closely um, with the Pacific Ombudsman of Humanitarian Law in Saipan as well.
Okay.
Then we also partner with, we're always looking to partner with more people. Um, and I know I'm talking to a few other people, individuals about coming on to TVAP so that we can make sure that we assist survivors in the territories.
Great, great. And certainly we want to be able to, I'm going to take this opportunity to also reach out to our partners to say work with us so that we'll be able to roll this. The Guam Coalition is not a direct service provider, but
Mm-hmm.
we will certainly be the broker to services to be able to facilitate being able to provide. Thank you so much for working with us on this, Alex. And are there any other questions? If not, Alex, if I may just ask you to stick around after the break. I'm
Yep.
pretty sure if there are any other questions that pop up, then we'll be able to have you close and within reach. And then at this point, too, just wanted to point out that yes, we do have a copy of Alex's PowerPoint. We will have that available as the coalition team has been posting in the chat. That is available on our webinar on our website. And so before we go on to break, just wanted to do a brief, let me see if I can get this thing going. Okay, just wanted to, boy, technology, sometimes it works with you and then you wonder where it is. Okay. Uh, so just wanted to point out again that the handouts will be on our website, guamcoalition.org. Awareness and HTA 2021 is the password. Wanted to do a friendly reminder as we are still dealing with this pandemic and COVID is still in our communities. Doesn't matter what island you're on. Wash your hands, wear your mask, keep your distance, and we appreciate your being on because I think via Zoom we're keeping our safe distance, but being able to communicate. And then, two, right after the break, we'll be back at uh, my we will put in a break here, a 10-minute break. So at 10:30, we will start with CARE Social Services, followed by Pohnpei Women's Council, Chuk Women's Council, American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. So I just needed this moment to be able to set up the PowerPoints for the next set. And then that's also a cue in. We're going to start with Lori after the break. Just wanted to point out, I'm going to put in a little plug, as I mentioned earlier. We're doing our next webinar on identifying and responding on to stalking. So these are the topics for day one, February 2nd, February 3rd, February 4th, and February 5th. Just wanted to point out too then that it is also tomorrow Standard Time from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And we do have the registration links already set up. And that's on our SurveyMonkey /r/Feb Web 2021. And that's, you'll be able to register, and we will have the flyer up on our website. Perhaps it may be easier to remember, guamcoalition.org. So on that note, we just wanted to take a break. So we'll be back at 10:30 to start with our second half. So tune in. Thank you. Happy day, everyone. We just have a couple more minutes to your break. So if you still need to, go quickly, go grab your favorite beverage, and we'll be starting momentarily. So we want to thank, of course, Alexander Delgado, who joined us this morning to do our presentation. And we have standing in the wings Loria Gamoro with Caridat Social Services. And we also have Emiliana Musrasrik Carl. She'll be ready to present on Pohnpei Women's Council. We have Kiki Stinnett with Chuk Women's Council. And then we'll have Judy Matauteo with the American Samoa Alliance against domestic and sexual violence. So we certainly want to thank our partners for joining us today, and especially for those who presented yesterday and last week too. If not for them, we wouldn't have been at a loss just trying to provide this information. Certainly, it is our aim and our goal to provide and enrich our our understanding to be able to better serve to this population, especially to labor and to sex trafficking victims in our communities. So in a moment, I'm going to ask and call on, let me see, let me stop my share. And I'm going to call on Lori Ogumoro so we can get started because I know she has a lot to share. So Lori, if you will, there you go.
Can you see the
Okay.
screen?
Yes, I can see the screen. So before she starts, just wanted to point out that she's the director of Caridat. It is Northern Mariana Islands social service agency and the only nonprofit agency in the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands that provides a safety net to those living in poverty and victims of violence and natural disaster. Of course, she has much to share with the work that she's done, and of course, with what she has done in the past also to ensure that victims and survivors of human trafficking in the Northern Marianas are certainly served. So thank you, Lori, and your slides are up. Great.
Okay, so let's hope I know how to work this. Thanks to Cynthia and Taylor for working me through this. But like Cynthia said, I'm Lori Ogumro, and I want to share a little bit about Caridat and sort of about giving an overview of what we do and how what we do at Caridat really kind of works together with everything that works together for trafficking. So Caridat was established in 1980 and the Family Services Program. But in May 7th, 2005, we took in our first survivor of human trafficking through Guma Esperanza, our women's shelter. Before I was the executive director, I worked at our women's shelter for about 13 years. And we took in a Chinese woman who ran away from her employer. And she was picked up on the street by an American man. She was all bloodied. They took her to the emergency room and at the hospital, and the emergency room of the hospital brought, so the police officers brought her to the shelter, and we sort of had a debate. Saying, well, she was beat up by her employer. We didn't really know, what was happening with her. So we got a translator, and through the translator, we said, oh my God, this is not domestic violence. This is not labor. This is something else. And that was our first case of human trafficking. So our overview of our programs at Caridat, we do disaster services, family services, all these things work together, and you never know where a victim of human trafficking will show up. You may discover when you're out there providing services through a disaster, and people in Guam and Micronesia know that we get typhoons or something, and you may be out there providing a service and something may not look right, and you'll discover a victim of human trafficking. Through your sexual assault program, you'll discover a victim of human trafficking. So Caridat assists everyone. We don't discriminate. you know, your immigration status. It's important that we just provide services to whoever comes through our door. So these are sort of an overview of what we do. And like I said, you never know where you're going to pick up somebody who might be a victim. So I'm just going to quickly go through those slides. The Family Services Program, you know, we provide food, and especially during this pandemic, we've been providing a lot of food and rental assistance to folks who have been furloughed because of COVID. We have a thrift shop, and it's been seeing a lot of action because people just don't have the funds to shop anymore. So we get donated food, and these are kids that through their school they donated. So sometimes we may run low on food to feed our trafficking victims, and so they may take advantage of our donated food as well. So Gum Esperanza is our shelter for women primarily, but we've also provided shelter for men survivors of domestic violence and human trafficking through our shelter. We also take older sons. We try not to discriminate because of their age. Usually the older male sons don't want to stay in the shelter because it's sort of a confined space. We do have an ADA accessible room. The important thing about the shelter is, you know, you want to create a safe space and a welcoming space, and the shelter is, you know, when you provide that safety and you build that trust, you'll start to discover when you're cooking food, they'll start to tell you your story, their story, and that's when you really will hear what's going on. And when you bring the translators up, you'll hear their story, and they'll tell you. We have the FBI will come to our shelter and work with the survivors. The lawyers who from the U.S. Attorney's Office will come. You know, we've had foreign nationals, minor U.S. citizen victims, and when they have to go to trial, you know, we have to have a safe space for them. And so the shelter, it becomes that safe space. We also, it also can be a confining space because, you know, sometimes when you're a minor, you want to get out and see the world. But if you're scared of who's out there, you'll stay. And if you're not so afraid, you'll try to run away. So it can work both ways, but we have to deal with it, and the staff have to be kind of on their toes sometimes. But that's just the reality of a shelter experience. We also have a sexual assault services program, and you know, providing services to sexual assault survivors, and you know, we've dealt with a lot of victims of sexual violence, and when we first started serving survivors of sex trafficking, usually that was our first whole group of survivors of trafficking were sex trafficking victims. And then the US government sort of closed the borders. And then after that, it's all been primarily for national labor trafficking victims. So that's a whole nother story. But, you know, sexual assault services is really an important component of any kind of services to survivors. So you need to build that into any program you have. So you may also have to have temporary restraining orders. It just depends on the case, and you need to have a supportive system to be able to do this. So these are all different programs within kNOw, and they all work together to support the survivors of trafficking. So that's why I'm kind of sharing you a little bit about that. This is our victim hotline. This is the newest bulletin board, billboard that is out in the community. And we actually have gotten calls through the victim hotline. It was actually a survivor of trafficking who called us and said, I think I know of a woman who's being trafficked. And we worked with an FBI agent who then sort of did her reconnaissance. And she actually worked with a nun, and they went into the home and was able to actually rescue this girl who was being held as a sex slave. So, and that call came through the victim hotline. So you never know where you're going to get a call or a tip for somebody who's been a victim of trafficking. Caradot, you know, like I said, we started our services in 2005. Unbeknownst to us, that was we didn't know about trafficking, I can truly admit. It was something new. You know, I knew about domestic violence and sexual assault. In my earlier life, I worked at our hospital, and, you know, we did a lot of that work, but trafficking was something new to me and something we had to learn about. And you had to learn fast, because once we had our first victim, then we had our next two victims, and then it just kept rolling. And since 2005, it's never stopped. Right now, we have a caseload of over 100 survivors of labor trafficking, and we're working with Alex and his program, and we have continual grants since 2006 from the U.S. Department of Justice to support our program. So it's a lot of work, but it's also very joyous when the survivors can get a T visa. Most of our survivors are foreign nationals. And when they get a T visa, which allows them to remain in the United States, because many of them cannot go home to their home country because of the whole trafficking situation, it's really a celebration. It may be bittersweet because they can't just run home because now they have this visa. It does not allow them to go home for a few more years, but it gives them the opportunity to move forward with their lives. And that's what's important. So we, as social service providers, have to work closely with legal service providers. And that's what's really important, because we're required, you know, I as a service provider say, hey, that looks like trafficking, but we need a legal service provider to say, yes, that's really trafficking, or no, you're not quite right, it doesn't fit the definition. So we have to work together. You also need to work closely with, you know, your faith-based community. You know, they may be able to provide support, or they may see something. Law enforcement. We also provide medical, dental, mental health services to our clients. You know, because we have a large caseload right now, we also have people with chronic medical conditions. In the past, you know, people who come from countries where they may not have good dental care. We've provided people with, you know, dentures and all sorts of things. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we do just to give people the care that they need that they may not have gotten. It's a lot of work, but it's gratifying. When they come to you, they may be scared, but you build that rapport and that trust, and you just work through it. And then when they leave, they say, oh, you're my mother. And it's like, no, I'm not your mother, but I'm glad I could help you. And then they never forget you. They're always send you greetings and Happy New Year, and they remember you. And because you were there at a pivotal time in their life when they needed, you know, some support, because it was a very dark time. And so it's important that we have that whole coalition of people to support people through this. I guess that's sort of a quick overview. I didn't know how much time I had. Cynthia didn't say that, but You know, I really wanted to give a shout out to Alex. He did a great job on his Trafficking 101, and I'm just providing a quick overview of what kNOw does. You know, we have lots of stories, but I don't think that this is the time and place for that. So thank you very much.
Laurie, we'll be able to also ask you to share those if time permits. But there is a question in the chat. It does ask, someone is asking what countries are trafficking victims in CNMI from?
Primarily the trafficking victims that we've had are from the Philippines, China, Bangladesh, Russia, are the ones that we've had. We've also had US citizen domestic minor trafficking victims. We have not had adult US citizen victims, but the biggest caseload would be, right now it's Chinese and Bangladeshis. In the past, it's been Filipino and Chinese, so it's kind of shifted to Chinese and Bangladeshi right now.
The other question that is also in the chat is, does any other legal organization provide services? Is it Micronesian Legal Services? Do they do like protective orders, restraining orders for trafficking victims?
Right now, we're working very closely with the Pacific Ombudsman for Humanitarian Law. Their executive director is Ms. Pam Brown. Micronesian Legal Services has a small caseload of some of our clients. The protective orders are done in-house by kNOw. And right now, we don't have any clients that have protective orders. What we're doing right now is working through the T visa process. And I think, as Alex pointed out, the T visa process takes a long time. It takes about 2 years. So as you can imagine, if we take a client in, the process to get their T visa application ready to go and be submitted takes a couple of months, maybe 4 to 6 months, maybe longer if they need translation and they need to write out a statement and it has to be translated. It may take 4 to 6 months, and then it has to be submitted. So, and because of the past, like Alex pointed out, it was taking like 2 years. So we're talking about 3 years. So by the time it gets going, so those clients are in kNOw for 3 years. So I am spending money to house and feed and medical care and dental care and all the things that go along with caring for that person for up to 3 years, sometimes more. So as you can see, it's very expensive. And so we have to write grants and keep them going. And people have apartments and they have to get food every month and medical care. So we have really great case managers who, we have one, Rose takes care of the apartments, and you know, it's a daunting task to keep over 100 people in apartments on Saipan within the budget. And people complain, but you know, we have a limited budget. And then, you know, there's food that you have to keep people in a budget. Because we don't have all the resources in the world. And so we, you know, because of the pandemic, it's kind of interesting. There's actually more food available, you know, for people to go and line up and get food than when there was no pandemic. So in a way, we tell them, go and line up here and you can get extra food. It's a little weird, but that's a reality. So it could take up to 3 years because you gotta, you know, when you come in, then you have to do sort of an investigation legally. And these people are referred to us. We don't go out and rescue anybody. They're all referred to us by legal providers, usually by lawyers. We've had a few that are brought to us by the FBI, but that was in the past. There's a few in the past that they did raids and we got like 23 Filipino women, 7 were underage girls, you know, and almost 100% of our clients have gotten T visas. So we know how to do this work. When we had a big raid on the case here. We brought in nuns from China. We got them special visas to come from China so that they could help us with translation of Chinese statements. And Sister Angie was fantastic. She was able to translate the Mandarin statements to English, and that really facilitated these men to get their T visas. And she, bless her heart, was a little shell-shocked, after that. But after she did this work, where she went down to, the border between the US and Mexico and was working with the migrants there. So, God bless the nuns. She was really great, Sister Angie. And then we had Sister Roseanne, who was also helping. So, we looked for resources that we could get to help us with the translation of these documents, as statements to facilitate just the caseload, because we had a big case a few years ago. I don't know if you've read about it in the papers, but I won't go into that now. So thank you for that question. I digress.
No, it just means you've got a lot of stories, and you are the go-to as far as experts and resource here in our neighborhood. So we thank you so much, because if not for CareDot Social Services and the services that you were able to generate or provide there at CareDot, I'm sure many of the traffic victims, labor and sex trafficking victims that you serve would have no other place to go to. So we applaud you for all your work. And if I just can ask you to stick around, and we'll share and hear from our other partners in case there are other questions. And if anyone else has other questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. So thank you so much, Lori, for joining us this morning. And we will certainly look to you as our resource as we're pulling together the TVAP for Guam as well, so we can support your efforts. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now I'm going to call on Emiliana Musrasri Carl. If you would come on, and I've got you listed as our presenter. I'm not sure if you want me to take care of your slides, or you've got that under control. Hello, Emmy.
Hi, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for joining us. And of course, Emmy comes to us from Pohnpei, and she is the Director of Court Administration for the Federated States of Micronesia, the Supreme Court. Her role as Director of Court Administration is to facilitate the administrative functions of the court, identify and implement initiatives that increases the public's understanding of the judicial system and provide for equal access to justice. But more importantly, Emmy certainly works closely also as the president for the Pohnpei Women Council. And I just totally appreciate your joining us for this webinar. And I will pass it on to you and take it over. Thank you so much, Emmy.
Thank you, Cynthia, and congratulations to Guam Coalition for putting together this such a awesome, very important workshop. So thank you and congratulations, Guam Coalition. And thank you also for allowing us to be part of this webinar. So greetings from Pohnpei, Casilelia. As Cynthia said, mentioned, I sort of wear many hats. So I'll try in my presentation, try to give a few on what the NGOs do in Pohnpei, under the Pohnpei Women Council, and our relationship with the government, especially with the court, in my capacity as Director of Court Administration. So if it's okay with you, I would start off first with the national judiciary. So the mission of the court is to serve the people, through timely and fair administration of justice for all by discharging its judicial duties and responsibilities in accordance with the FSM Constitution, the laws, customs, and traditions of the unique Pacific Island nation. So we're very, it's a very good constitution as it gives recognition to our custom and tradition. As you all know, the Federated States of Micronesia consists of four states. That's Chuk, Koshai, Yap, and Pohnpei, with four totally different languages and four or many different cultures and traditions and cultures. So that's one of the challenges that the Federated States of Micronesia has. Geographical configuration also is one of the impending challenges that we have. Regarding the Trafficking in Persons Act, Public Law 17-38, that's the FSM TIP or Trafficking in Persons Act that was passed in 2012. Now, I do want to mention that prior to the case we heard through this webinar, the Blue House case. When the Blue House case occurred in Guam, FSM does not have any Trafficking in Person Act in place. So that was that case, the Blue House case, triggered the passage of the FSM's Trafficking in Persons Act. So it was passed in 2012, followed suit by all the four states. Shortly after that, a year later in 2013, 2014. But it took several years for people, at least FSM citizens, to really understand what is human trafficking, and also to accept the fact that this is not just a foreign concept, that this is something that is happening in our own backyards, in our own communities. And so I will explain a little bit about the disaggregated data that we have filed in the FSM Supreme Court. Now, the cases that we have is very minimal compared to what we saw or we heard from our colleagues from Los Angeles or US or Guam. There's very few cases, but how these cases are very are minimal compared to others for small countries like Pohnpei, for example, or FSM. However, the impact of what these cases does to the community, to the families, is huge. So for us, it's really the fact that people are now accepting, people are coming forward and reporting these cases. That's very important. My background, prior to working with the court, I used to run the Migrant Resource Center, and that was under the IOM program. And we started the Migrant Resource Center in 2011. And immediately we started launching the awareness raising on anti-human trafficking all across the FSM. So the first year we reached over 7,000 in terms of beneficiaries, people that attended our training. Then the second year we reached over 6,000. We opened an office in Marshall Islands, we meaning IOM, sorry. So that continues. So when FSM passed its human trafficking legislation, the Migrant Resource Center have already reached out to a lot of our citizens. The target audience were students, the law enforcement officers, public defenders, civil society, women, youth, of course, and faith-based organizations. We also reached out to the people with disability. And at that time, FSM was on tier 2 watch list under the US State Department, Trafficking in Persons. It showed in the report. So for the last 3 years, FSM remained on tier 2, and that's based on the efforts by the FSM national government. Now they have a unit under Department of Justice, Human Trafficking Unit. They've done investigation, they've prosecuted cases, they've done a lot of the awareness raising, taking on what IOM used to do. There are other NGOs under the Pohnpei Women Council, um, for example, like the Micronesia Resource Research Institute, and that's an organization that I founded, um, that also does the pre-departure cultural orientation training in addition to human trafficking. So these are trainings that are ongoing, and due to COVID 19 lockdown, like the training that I'm talking about, the pre-departure cultural orientation, we work closely with the College of Micronesia, FSM, and mainly for the students who are graduating and going off abroad to the United States. So we want to target to make sure that they do understand the do's and the don'ts before they get on the plane and leave. Because as we all know and we've heard, there are citizens of the FSM that have become um, victims of trafficking um, in the while living in the United States. So some of the recommendations as outlined under the US State Department TIP report, one is just to increase efforts to investigation and prosecute and convict traffickers and sentence convicted traffickers to significant prison terms. I highlighted the last portion of this sentence because the court was criticized in one of the TIP reports for giving lenient sentences. Um, and so that came out as one of the recommendations. Now, trainings or human trafficking awareness raising have been conducted to our judiciary staff as well. And when trainings are conducted, we target the local court, the local and municipal court judges, state court, as well as the national courts. So, and the second recommendation is as training for police, law enforcement on procedures and proactive ID identification, referrals, monitor foreign labor recruitments, and strengthen the anti-human trafficking awareness to FSM migrating to the United States. There has been task force both at the national and the state level, and Pohnpei Women Council is member of the Pohnpei Women or the Pohnpei State Task Force. So just to highlight some of the efforts that the court, especially the FSM Supreme Court, has done. This is something new, and I really wanted to point out that the court is now engaging in this area of reaching out to the community to provide training and awareness raising to the community. And for the past year and a half, we have done the access to justice training in all 4 states, enabling rights and unrepresented litigants. This is another project that we did about 2 years ago. And I'm happy to say that the toolkit for enabling rights and unrepresented litigants has been translated in all the 4 languages, and they're available under the FSM Supreme Court website. So, and that's very important because it really gives an insight of the rights of individuals. So it's a sort of a booklet in itself, but translated in all the 4 languages. Gender and family violence, we've also reached out to, we've done the training in Guashai and Pohnpei, and the reason it was targeted for the 2 states is because these are the 2 states that have passed its Family Protection Act. So we've done the gender family violence workshop. Some of these workshops, by the way, were recently conducted for the past 4 or 5 months through virtual training due to the lockdown of due to COVID. I don't know, some of you may have heard, but for Pohnpei, we have our first positive COVID case. So it's nerve-wracking. Thank you for reminding us, Cynthia, that we have to continue to wash our hands and wear the mask and all that. But even the court, we have our contingency plan on what to do. So staff are required to start using the protective gears, mask and all of that. Um, One other thing we did was the public survey on court performance, and this is very important. So I recently rejoined the court 3 years ago. I used to work for the court in my capacity as director of court administration. Then I went on with my work with the US Peace Corps and IOM and running my NGO programs. Um, so coming back, we decided to do a public survey, and it was very interesting because the survey we conducted 3 years ago, if I were to use the rating of the report cards that school does, A to F, we were rating at F minus, if there's such thing. People didn't really understand, or the um, perception of what the court is very negative. Um, so when we started doing this access to justice training and enabling rights, gender family violence, we did the same, repeated the same survey the second year, and you see the major switch. So people, it's also important that the court understand, especially victims, when they come to court, that they have the confidence and the trust that justice will be provided to them when they do come to court, and especially witnesses. In the court's view, um, one of the things that the FSM government does is they continue to pass these laws. Like recently, last year, they passed the People with Disability Act, which is great. But we need to immediately adapt to that. And now we have the disability parking. Currently, the court does not have. I'm very impressed, by the way, of the sign language, the persons that you have conducting the sign language as we progress. That is awesome. And that's one of the things that I'm noting down as one of the things that we need. So if we have a victim of disability who can't hear or can't see, we don't know what to do. We have, however, utilized, there was a defendant from a foreign country, and with our connection with the Guam Superior Court of Guam, we were able to get an interpreter from the Guam NGO interpreters NGO. I can't remember the exact name, but we were able to bring that person in to translate. It was a human trafficking case. So that was very successful. And I'm very grateful, again, with the partnership that we have with our other courts, jurisdictions. So personally, I see this as a partnership. A lot of the presentations we hear coming from NGOs perspective, but I wanted to also showcase the data that we have. This is, by the way, keep in mind, this is just FSM. Each state has their own human trafficking cases, and they're not shown here. So currently, we have 8 cases that have been filed with the FSM Supreme Court. And you'll see the breakdown there on how many cases were in Chuk. Now, these are number of cases filed, but there are cases that involve multiple defendants and multiple victims. So we have a total of 8. And the status of these cases, we had 8 convictions, there were 6 acquittals, and 2 pending. Defendants by age, you'll see that it says, I guess all the defendants here in this are adults. However, on the victim's age, all but 2 are minors. So the 2 that we recently have filed are from the state of Koshrai, and the victims are adults. They're 20 or 21, or 19 and 21. Gender of defendants, mostly 14 were male and 2 female. And gender of the female. So you'll see all the victims are female are females. We also have broken down into the citizenship. Now, this is very interesting and it's so important because I mentioned earlier that the misconception of people that this is a foreign matter. It doesn't apply to us, and it only applies to foreigners. But the statistics we have are showing just the opposite. The defendants, majority are FSM citizens. So that's why I said that it's happening here in our own backyard. Citizens of victims, they're 100% FSM citizens. And it's so sad to mention that the perpetrators, especially the FSM citizens, are family, very, very close family members. And this is to show just some of the differences in the types of sentences. Now, like I said, the court was criticized for being lenient. And one of the things that don't really come up and people don't really understand are the plea bargains that occur behind the scene between the prosecutor and the defense. So the judge may give a ruling, but this is based on what was agreed upon between the two parties. However, the cases that occur later, you'll see there's 75 years, there's fine up to 60,000, restitutions are being imposed. The suspended imposition are to allow the defendant to be able to be released during certain time of the day or the week in order to work so that he or she can then pay the restitution to the victims. So that's part of the work release. We have cases where the defendants were transferred from the state of Chuk to Koshayan to Pohnpei. And I know Kiki is listening from the Chuk Women Council, but personally on a personal level, I really want to congratulate and thank the Chuk Women Council for helping out on these, especially with the victims in the cases in Chuk. So that's sort of the snapshot of what we have in the court system at the national level. And we're starting working very hard in trying to capture as much as we can on the disaggregated data. And our annual report, the court's annual reports, which are available online, also have the overall case tracking system or the case data, including the human trafficking. So our 2020 report, annual report, has not been completed, and that will be available within a month or so. However, for the 2019, you can see that available on the fsmsupremecourt.org website. Pohnpei Women Council, it is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization established in 1990 and registered with Pohnpei state government. There are over 30 groups that have signed up, or are members, and individual members are over 2,000. The main mission is to improve the lives of women and children in communities through custom and tradition, education, health, government, and economic, environment, and social amenities. Our vision statement, it says to trust in an improved society that raises the standards of living of women and children. Now, the Women Council, the Pohnpei Women Council consists of, we have a group of nurses that are members of the group, and they're out there as first responders on the, for the COVID. They are also the ones that go out and do the awareness raising on STDs and teenage pregnancies and the vaccination that come up on the island and or available on the island. And then we also have the traditional women who are members of they're actually the honorary members of the council. Um, and education, women of education, we have farmers, we have fisher women, there's youth, there's even a Zumba group that is registered under this organization. So um, and they're out there in the communities. Now we recently have the Outer Island women, Kapingamarangi women, who also joined. Um, so it's very, it's a huge group. We have a center that is in town. The problems or issues that we have right now are, there's no funding for a 24-hour person or a staff to be manning that office. So we meet on a for on a case by case basis during meetings. But that's one of the things that the new members, officers of the Philippine Women Council would like to do. So we have met with the U.S. government, U.S. embassy. We've met with the embassies on island, the national government, and our partner with IOM. Uh, the facility will be renovated, but due to the lockdown, the military who will be assisting can't come on island, so that's put on hold. We have what we call a traditional NAS, which is in the back of the building, and I saw the similar one from the American Samoa. But that is a traditional house that will be used for teaching traditional knowledge, weaving, and cooking for the young women. Um, the what we'd like to do is similar to what the Troop Women Council has, to build upgrade the building in order to fit for shelter for victims of domestic violence or victims of trafficking, stranded migrants, and not only that, but to upgrade our training capacity, building the staff capacity so that we can have certified counselors um, to help with victims, especially victims of trafficking. Bombay Women Council there was a clash with the state government about a year ago where the victims were brought into the center by the Attorney General's office and was told, okay, here, they kind of just left the girls there. But then the late president of the Bombay Women Council said, first of all, we don't have the funding. We can't feed them. We don't have the capacity. We're not experts. We don't know what to do with them. What if one of them decided to kill herself or himself? Who's going to be liable? So that was one of the things that the state government wasn't thinking about, and so you see the clash between the two. But thank goodness to IOM, they were able to provide the assistance that was needed, and the victims were brought or taken to another shelter, which was way out in the municipality. Um, but that was an organization that was funded or assisted financially by IOM, so they were capable of handling the victims. And one thing on a personal note that I do want to share is the victims. The victims that were in the state, the first case that was filed, first human trafficking case that was filed in the Bombay State Court came through my organization under IOM at that time. So we help in the processing of all the documents and transmit the case to the police, resulted in the indictment of the defendants, perpetrators, who were the parents of the victims. Now, the case, unfortunately, ended up in an acquittal, and all the victims were all minors, 3 of them. Now, what I wanted to mention is acquittal doesn't necessarily mean that the crime didn't happen. It may be that there was a breakdown in the prosecutor presentation, or perhaps in the court. I can't really speak on that, but it doesn't mean that the crime didn't happen. So that case ended up in an acquittal. Um, but then we saw, when I moved back to the national court, I saw the new cases filed here at the FSM Supreme Court. And then the same victims showed up. So it was filed as a new case um, under a different jurisdiction, which the prosecutor decided to file at the national level. But it was the same victims, at least two of them. And the third victim was someone that was reported through our office to the national police then at that time. And so I have to be careful what I'm saying here so I don't compromise the court, but speaking on an NGO perspective. So the cases were then filed at the national court. And of course, ended up with a conviction, and that was a 60-year, 10 years on each of the count, and so 60 years in terms of jail time with high restitution and fines. But so that's just something that I wanted to bring out, for social workers and those of us who are really advocating against this human trafficking, that even though the case resulted in an acquittal, please don't just give up, because it will reoccur, and in most cases it will reoccur. And so the work that we do, all of us as NGOs and social workers, we continue to give the support. And one of the things that you do, when, especially during the trauma and when you help them, the case that came through, at least my office under the IOM, you get so attached to the victims, especially when they're minors, that they start calling you Nono or Mama. And so when I saw them here, immediately they ran to you, and really it was like, because just being in the court setting, it's scary. And so they were surrounded by police officers as if they were defendants. When I walked in and I saw them in the library sitting there, that was the first thing that crossed my mind. So one of the weakness or the failure of, at least for the court, is we do not have a safe haven where we can place the victims and or witnesses in a place where they can be comfortable while waiting for their turn for trial. And so immediately I brought this up to the Chief Justice, and I said, this is unacceptable. They cannot be sitting there surrounded by police officers. So right now we have designated offices in all the national courts in all 4 states. Like for Pohnpei, for example, my office is the safe haven, temporary. So we're requesting funding to build another office or designated office for victims and witnesses, especially for trafficking cases when they appear in court. But to add on to that, this is again on a personal level. When I saw one of the victims, she was pregnant. So I asked her, I said, so you are pregnant? She says, yes, I got married. And the sad part of what she says was, I wanted to get out of this thing. So therefore she forced herself to get married. So she's pregnant now. I think by now she already had a baby. But these are the things of, how the individuals and the community are impacted. And not only that, but she said, my sister died. And that was the eldest sister of the 3 victims. And so you can just imagine how heartbreaking that is. That's just one case that I'm sharing, and I'm sure I'll leave that to Kiki, who can then share some of her experience working with the defendants in Chuk. Um, but then the other case, um, this is the defendant, one of the defendants in one of our cases here. The taxi driver owner. Now, it's unclear whether the owner knew what was going on or not, but the defendant was using this taxi to pick up the victims and do the trafficking business. The taxi owner passed away last year while the trial was going on, and right immediately after the trial, he passed away. So whether this affected him, the family and the community, it's unclear, but I can imagine that it really does have an impact on them. Um, the case in Chuk, for example, they had to transfer the defendants here because of for safety purposes. Um, and so it's very important. One of the cases in Chuk, these are, like I said, it's happening in our own front yard, in our own islands. Sadly to say, the people that we entrust our children to, these were four ministers, church ministers, that are currently serving jail time in Chuk for a case of trafficking in Chuk. So um, what is going on? What's happening in our community? This is serious, and yes, we all need to step up, continue the awareness raising. People need to understand what is this. Um, I must say though that at least for the Pohnpei cases, probably 90% or if not 100% of the cases that were reported, the informants that reported the cases to the police were all people that attended the human trafficking, anti-human trafficking awareness raising. So when they saw the signs, they knew immediately that something was wrong and they reported. We had a case where the witness and the informant was a teacher of an elementary school here in Pohnpei. And she came forward. Her name was published in the newspaper, although I guess she gave permission. So, hopefully her safety and her family's safety is not at risk at the moment. But she was willing to come forward and testified in open court what she saw. And she was a teacher of one of the victims, and she saw how her students' grades were going down, and she started keeping track of a particular fan that would come in during certain time during the recess, and the girl will disappear, and then she shows up. So she reported, and that case, again, this is a state court case, but it ended up with a conviction. So it takes someone to really come forward and report. Um, and so I really applaud all the social workers, those who are working together, our stakeholders, our partners, in working together to advocate against this evil crime. Um, I think that's all I have at the moment, Cynthia, unless there's any questions.
Actually, Emmy, there was an earlier post in the chat talking about how great your chart is with regards to the demographics for victims and defendants that you shared, and wondered if we had any for Guam. Just wanted to point out, though, that unfortunately, I think we can only count on the Blue House case as a case that has gone through the court system. And then again, that's with our federal partners working on that. So unfortunately, this is one of the reasons why we are certainly pushing forward to raise greater awareness of human trafficking, because we do recognize that it is very much under the radar. And so rather than it exploding in our faces, we have our experts in the region who we can count on to help us pull this together. In fact, I know, Emmy, years back, the coalition was asked by IOM, oh, by the way, and that stands for International Organization for Migration, right, in FSM, because there were I think 3 or 4 children who were being trafficked by their parents, unfortunately, and so needed clinical psychologists to be able to do an assessment so they would, do the prosecution for that case. So yes, it has happened for many, many years. And we've been trying to provide support and trying to build the net within the region. So thank you for all that you do. And certainly what you share, we can almost just change the names to the villages and our own agencies here on Guam. So at least we'll be better prepared hearing from what you're sharing. So thank you so much, Emmy, for being part of this session with us. And just wanted to point out, folks, if you have any other questions, I'll just ask Emmy, and we have Lori also standing by who'll be able to respond. And if I may also ask for your collaboration with us and cooperation as we plan on extending beyond our 11:30 end date, because we want to be able to hear also from our partner Kiki, who's standing in the wings, and I'll be calling her shortly. And Judy was on yesterday to share more. So we want to thank you all for participating, and thanks, Emmy, and we'll have you waiting in case there are other questions, right?
Thank you, Cynthia.
Great. All right. So now I'm going to call on Kiki, and I've got your slides just ready for you. Let me put that up on board for you. So anytime you're ready, Kiki, we have Christina Stinnett, otherwise known as Kiki. She's certainly a successful entrepreneur residing in Chuuk. She has the first travel agency there. Of course, we're not doing much travel these days due to COVID. She also has her full service hotel, the Truck Stop Hotel. She's very, very active and currently serves as the president of Chuuk's Women's Council for over 10 years. She's very actively involved in many other aspects of the community. She's on the board of the Chuuk Conservation Society, the Chuuk State Board of Education, the FSM Women in Business Network, and she's also president of the FSM National Women's Council since 2018. No doubt with Lori, with Emmy, and now with Kiki, they are certainly great advocates and community leaders in their respective communities as well. So if I can call on Kiki, are you on? Or did I miss you?
Good morning. Thank you, Cynthia. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. So just let me know. I've got your slides. You can see my slides, right? Kiki, you're going to have to unmute again. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to also applaud my sister Amy from Pohnpei for giving a great overview of our judiciary system and what our Pohnpei Women Council is doing. Thank you, Amy. Next. I'm going to talk about the Chuuk Women Council. The Chuuk Women Council is an NGO, an umbrella organization in Chuuk. It was established in 1983 and officially registered with the FSM national government in 1993. We have over 60 women associations registered and over 1,000 membership throughout Chuuk State. CWC is dedicated in advancing women issues and empowering women and their families. Next. Our focus areas are agriculture and climate change, education, health, economic development, and today I'm going to focus on gender-based violence. All our programs are based on grant awards from our development donors, partners, the FSM Congress, and individual donations. Next. Human trafficking is nothing new to the Women Council. Our organization has been doing surveys and implementing programs on women issues dated back to 2010. In 2011, we had a grant from the South Pacific Commission to do a survey on true commercial sex work. The outcome of that survey was that there is sex work in Chuk. It is not organized, but it was happening. The girls involved were ages 15 to 24 years. It was happening in the homes by family members, youth, in the hotels with businessmen, government leaders, and Social Security recipient. Chuk Women Council responded to this issue by implementing the Mother and Daughter Stepping Stone program, and young women attended the workshop, and in return, some of them stayed on to do work at the center. This empowered the young women or young girls to look for other avenues of income other than sex works. Later in 2016, CWC opened the Young Women Empowerment Program through a grant from the Australian government. And this was very good for the girls. It is a program with curriculum, consists of lecture, discussion, videos, and educational curriculum. And we also teach about health, wellness, and practical skill building. The program also covers about gender, sex, sexuality, goal setting, health relationship, gender violence, mental health, reproductive health, healthy eating habits, and how to do local crafts, cooking, and sewing, which the girls really enjoy. And this is going on until today, and we're very grateful to the government of Australia through their TFAT program for funding this program. We also have another program that have helped our outreach with the special marginalized group, the GBTQ, SWTG, and MSM. This program is focused on HIV/AIDS and STI educational awareness in preventing HIV, AIDS, and STI, and also do testing. And the team also do peer-to-peer education on HIV, AIDS, and STI. And this program is also funded by UNDP. And this is the third year that it's going on. And this has really put us out in the community. We're getting involved at the grassroots and helping our people, especially this marginalized group, coming forward and sharing their challenges and the stigma that goes on within the community. Next. Our response to human trafficking. The FSM National Government Department of Justice provided the human trafficking shelter in Chuk, which is located on the same compound that the FSM National Police Office is. This provides security for the shelter. CWC donated some furniture and supplies for the shelter, and we collaborate with the FSM police and the human trafficking coordinator on human trafficking cases, and they also help come to our center and to education awareness to the young women empowerment, and also part of our Epimar SafeNet group for our counseling service. Chuk state government, like Emmy said, established a human trafficking coalition, and Chuk Women Council is also a member of the coalition. Like Emmy said, I want to share some of the court cases that went through court with the national government and courts and the Chuk State Court. And I just want also to add that these cases were also supported by the age of consent law with the outcomes of these cases. The case that Amy mentioned in her presentation, case number 2016-15 versus the Patachuk leaders, church leaders. And this was very sad because the young girl was abused by this church leader. And when she was asked why it takes her so long to report after she was pregnant. And this happened because her father was off island. So she was helping at the church, and this church leader were abusing her, and she became pregnant. When the father returned from Hawaii, then saw the daughter being pregnant, and that's when he reported the case. So the 4 pastors of the church were found guilty, and they're serving their sentence in Chuk. And it was sad because the community looked at this the victim as the bad person, or the family were kind of stigmatized, and they say a lot of bad things about the family, and even wrote letters to the court or people, our leaders, to support the pastor not to send them to prison, but the law stands. The second case was another case of number CR 085-2015 versus Cortez Benito. This is a construction worker, Filipino, and was also abusing young girls, and he was found guilty and paid the penalty, and he got deported. And this is during 2014, just when the age of consent passed, and this was really kind of highlight the age of consent law for our people to really understand that abusing young girls at young age is a crime. And the other case that Emmy also mentioned is the one, it's a family case that the auntie allowed the niece to be abused by her husband. And so this, like Emmy said, one of them is serving the sentence in Panpei and one in Koshrai. And the state court case CR-0686-2015 versus Hercules. This is a case of encouraging her niece to do sex work in exchange for food and money and just necessity. And this is, just a sad case of poverty. Next. Chuk State statistic on violence against women. In 2013, CWC participated in a FSM government survey sponsored by UNFPA, which is called Family Safety Survey or Studies. The FSM Safety Survey also revealed that Chuk has the highest number of women who experience physical and sexual, economical, and emotional violence. So the graph is reflecting that 49.9% of women experience physical and sexual violence. 24.9% experience economical violence, and 60.1% experience emotional violence. Chuk has the highest rate of physical and sexual violence during this period. The danger remains consistent in Chuk. There is limited support service available to women, girls, and children experiencing violence. Next. So the outcome of the survey, why women don't report: lack of understanding that they are a victim of this crime, shame about what happened to them, and the fear of stigmatization. Belief that the trafficking experience was their fault, lack of victim support service, lack of information about their rights and opinions, fear of not being believed. Some women also rather stayed in the marriage because of their children. Next. So in 2000, in March 9, 2020, last year, we opened our first and only gender-based violence counseling center in FSM. The establishment of this crisis support center is a critical program for CWC in achieving our mission. Chuk Women Council exists to assist women in becoming more productive and self-sufficient member of our society through comprehensive program which enhance the social, economic, and physical well-being of women and their families. Our commitment to the community is to be a catalyst for positive behavior change and to provide alternative choices for women and preserving our culture and traditional values and principles. Next. CWC spread edit the age of consent law, which moved the age from 13 to 18 years old in Chuk State. And that's what I said, that with the passage of the law, it has really helped support some of the cases that have been result in helping the young girls. CWC also advocate in promoting our proposed Family Protection Act, as Amy mentioned in her presentation, that Panape and Koshrai already established their family protection law. So Chuk State and Yap needs to pass their laws, and our goal for us, we're promoting that and lobbying with our lawmakers to pass this family protection law. And this COVID has really slowed down that process, but hopefully later this year we'll get it passed. Next. Our office is open, our counseling service is open 8 to 5 p.m. We have a 24-hour hotline, and that's our contact. We also have our Facebook, so you can view our Facebook, and we have our email, and we provide the quality counseling service for victims of gender-based violence. Since we opened, we have able to help and supported 85 clients, both women and girls. And this is with this COVID and just introducing our service in the community and in the schools, just raising awareness of what our service is all about and talk about domestic violence. And we also try to educate the people and our leaders on the proposed Family Protection Act. We also have in-house monitoring, and we do training for our volunteers and counselor. But our partners from the Pacific Women Shaping Development Organization are really the ones that help support our counseling service and providing the training for our counselor. Our activities are survivor or women center, which means we do not blame the women for the domestic violence, rape, and sexual harassment that has experienced or experiencing. It is never the woman's fault. The perpetrator is responsible for his behavior. Next. We have our team that go out and do awareness in the community and in the schools and really promote the service. And I think that with this COVID, when things get back to normal, a lot of people will come to the center. And we also create a referral pathway, which is consist of the Department of Health, State Public Safety, Micronesian Legal Service, State Attorney General, Department of Education, the FSM National Police, and the Human Trafficking Coordinator, and also the church leaders and community leaders. And this is the group that support our efforts in dealing with domestic violence victims and also working on our proposed Family Protection Act. So I just want to also add that the Chuk Women Council counseling service is new and we're still learning, and we are grateful to whoever that will help us improve on our service that we provide for our people. And this is a 3-year grant from Australian government, and so we are really trying to do a good job so they can extend the grant. But like I said, all our programs that we do at the Chuk Women Council is based on grants. And so we really try to link all the programs together and piggyback on each other's program when we go out in the community for sharing expenses. Next. We all deserve a life free from all forms of violence and to live in dignity. And I thank you. That's it.
Thanks so much, Kiki. We still have one more and one more speaker, and that's Judy Matautia, who's standing on by. So we appreciate all our attendees for staying on to hear what our partners here in the region are sharing with us today. So we'll still have Kiki, as well as Emmy and Lori standing by if you have any comments or any questions. Just wanted to point out that we talk about the Blue House case for Guam, but at that time when we did have the Blue House case in our community, we didn't have any place to house them. So we appreciate that Lori and Carried Out Social Services was able to provide assistance to the victims of human trafficking in that particular situation. So yes, we are trying to build this network, this net across the Pacific. So we appreciate that we also receive assistance, or at least Kiki with the Chuk Women's Council and the groups there are able to access resources from Australia, for example. So now I'm going to call on Judy Matautia. I know you've been waiting patiently. You also have a lot of information to share. So I'm trying to look for you on my screen. And I will, in the meantime, prepare your slides for you as you come on. And we've got many slides up on screen.
All right. Can you hear me, Cynthia?
Yes,
Are you able to hear
yes,
me?
yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So I'll just wait until you pull up our slide. I was actually fine to go last if you wanted.
You are it. There you go.
All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be quick because I only have 30 minutes. So
Actually, we've had to shorten that a bit, Judy.
okay.
So, and it's a good thing you started yesterday. So appreciate your
Yeah.
coming back again. At least you gave us a preview of what you're going to be sharing with us, right?
Okay. Yeah. All right. So thank you, Cynthia, and your Guam team for having us. We're so blessed to have a sister coalition like Guam and EDs like Cynthia, who's always keeping an eye out for us. So thank you, guys. Good day, everyone. I'm Judy Matautia with the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We're so grateful for the opportunity given to be able to share with you some of the information on human trafficking within our territory of American Samoa. So here on the slide, I hope that by the end of my time, I hope that when my time's up today, I would have been able to share some of this information, including the Samoa, or our Samoan way, and the framework for human trafficking here. Also social justice and human trafficking within our territory, seen from the lens of victims here in the territory. And of course, becoming agents of change in our community to combat human trafficking. Next slide, please. Okay, so with this one, traditionally Samoans are conservative and highly selective in their adoption of Western ideology and culture. And the traditional Samoan village has a collection of families that consist of brothers, sisters, uncles, cousins. And traditionally, the family contributes to the benefit of the entire village. And 95% of the land is communally owned by a handful of clans led by matais, or chiefs, that govern through village councils. And so most freehold landowners, who by law must be 50% Samoan, still have a connection to a village and provide support to their village and clans. So here we wanted to include this, the Samoa, or Samoan worldview, is notably articulated by renowned Samoan scholar and former Prime Minister, as well as former head of state of the independent state of Samoa, the Honorable Tuiatua Tupua Tamasese Efi. He quotes here, "I am not an individual, I am an integral part of the cosmos. I am not an individual because I share my tofi with my family, my village, and my nation. I belong to my family, and my family belongs to me. I belong to my village, and my village belongs to me. This is the essence of my sense of belonging." This was quoted from one of his books in 2003, called in the Samoan language, Suesu e Manongi. Translated into English would be something like, finding essence or in search of essence. And so the Fasamoa is perpetrated by an ancient system of power and control called the Famatai, or way of the chiefs. And at the top are believed to be God, and then the religious leaders, which we call the Fefi'aus. And next down the line are the elites or chiefs who trace their lineage, their Falubinga back to ancient Samoan clans, and ultimately the gods themselves. And this was also changed or later replaced by the missionaries. So titled men, those bestowed chiefly names within the village council, within their families by elders, are considered the next level of leadership. Below them are the untitled men, women, and children. And women are rarely given matai titles. There's still some women that fight for that today. And they hold support roles as sister, later as wife, or faletua, which means in English, back of the house, to their husbands. And the father is the head of the family. So the work to eliminate domestic and sexual violence in American Samoa requires that this Samoa, the understanding of our Samoan way, be an integral part, a vital part of the dialogue, of the discussion, of the conversations that we have here, or used to develop the training, any kind of training to promote community intolerance to behaviors such as human trafficking, physical, sexual violence, and to eliminate violence in our community. We are at our strongest when we gather and work for the benefit of our village or families. And the problem becomes when a victim of violence requires assistance or support. And if their needs negate the success of the village, the victims become voiceless. They are told not to share their stories and to suffer in silence. So human trafficking is one such crime in our community that is discussed behind closed doors, because in many times it impacts the villages or the families. And we'll discuss that more in detail when we get to those actual case studies. Next slide, please. So yesterday, I know we went over this picture yesterday, and I just wanted to say again, left is an earlier photo of a Samoan village, and the right is the most current picture of a Samoan village today. And the words of the Tuiatua, they remain true. The traditional Samoan village has a collection of families that consist of brothers, sisters, uncles, so forth, as well as 95% of the land is still communally owned. Next slide, please. And so as we do this work of fighting domestic and sexual violence in our territory, it's important that our community learn of these situations or factors which create challenging events for victims of violence. For our culture, there are traditions and cultural practices that support human trafficking, believe it or not. And in order to change the lens in which social norms that are accepted as tradition, it's important to learn concepts. In our community, we have to take these concepts and transfer or translate them, what we consider Western thought process, into our Fasamoa or our Samoan way. For this reason, we'll most likely go over information you're aware of. So for those who do the work of human trafficking, but it's important to create that picture and narrative of the work we do here in American Samoa. So this is what we learn about human trafficking through the websites, training sessions, etc. And human trafficking is a crime that forcefully exploits women, children, and men. It affects every country in the world, but is rarely talked about. Its most simplistic definition of description is that it involves transporting someone into a situation of exploitation, including forced labor, marriage, prostitution, and sometimes organ removal. Also, it's estimated internationally to be between 20 to 40 million people in modern slavery today. And then only 0.4% survivors of human trafficking cases are identified. So these are the things that we learn as we go through that paints a picture of what human trafficking is out there to us. Next slide, please. So for the Alliance, using a social justice lens to discuss and develop the framework for human trafficking work in American Samoa, it's very critical. And we recognize social justice is used to address sensitive topics such as gender, race, discrimination, poverty, sorry, and additional issues can be immigration and economic security that are, what is the word, intricately connected to the ways people access services and their ability to lead and live productive and healthy lives. So the Alliance believes that urging a social justice lens can help us to create changes of beliefs and behaviors in our community, and to promote their critical consciousness and active involvement in social justice activities, so to eliminate domestic and sexual violence within our community. Also, persons who fall victim to trafficking are not random, but rather are part of populations made vulnerable through economic injustice, racial or ethnic oppression, gender discrimination, or any number of oppressions. And then it's through sets of conditions or destruction of local economy where vulnerable people immigrate in search of a better life for themselves, and therefore placed in set of conditions where they fall prey to traffickers. And as we move forward, this is extremely important to remember, because for American Samoans, what happens when culture and mix of vulnerability meet the definition of human trafficking? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're not going to go over that because we showed that yesterday, and basically that's the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000. So we just wanted that there so that we'll be able to compare it to the next slide. Can we see the next slide? So this slide, this is the American Samoa Anti-Human Trafficking Bill. That was in the legislation for signed in 2014. And we wanted to put it there, but we also wanted to mention that there's no mention of funding or on who provides training or follow up on whether the Department of Public Safety here have received training, or any other department that's involved for that matter. So next slide. Okay, so according to Human Trafficking Hotline, American Samoa statistics have been collected since 2015, and that was only like 5 years ago. Please make a note that our human trafficking problems did not just begin in 2015. In 2014, our government implemented the human trafficking legislation. That's when our local human trafficking law came into effect. And according to the Human Trafficking Hotline data collected from 2015 to 2019, a total of 5 contacts, 2 in 2015 and 3 that were possibly recorded prior to 2015. A total of 3 cases were reported. Where 1 case being reported in 2019, this would lead us to believe that the 2 other cases were reported prior to 2015. When the legislation for human trafficking was developed, the AG, or the Attorney General at that time, was Ms. Mitzi Jessup, and she stated that the majority of human trafficking victims in the territory are citizens from our neighboring Samoa, or our sister Samoan island. The island that used to call themselves Western Samoa, and we have familial ties and everything to Samoa. For those who do not know, there is an independent country of Samoa, which is a 30-minute plane ride away from American Samoa. They have the same cultural practices, share the same language as we have familial ties, and we're all connected through land, family lineage. But the biggest difference is American Samoa is a U.S. territory. Many come to American Samoa to be with family to find a better future. And these vulnerable populations who come to American Samoa for better opportunities would meet the definition of human trafficking as discussed. But in the Samoa, believe it or not, in our Samoan way, many disagree. Many disagree that what's going on is not human trafficking. Next slide, please. So these are a few major cases before our legislation in 2014. As you can see, there are only 3 cases there. There were not that many cases then, but the number of cases were down, but these cases were major cases. For example, the first case, like we mentioned yesterday, that case put us on the map, unfortunately. 2005, former owner of an American Samoa garment factory who was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his role in holding over 200 victims in forced servitude. The owner of the Devusa garment factory was convicted in 2003 for numerous federal criminal violations, including involuntary servitude, extortion, and money laundering. The workers were recruited from China and from state-owned labor export companies in Vietnam. They paid fees of approximately between $5,000 to $8,000 to gain employment at this factory and risk retaliation and punishment at home if deported back to their native lands. So Lee, one of those that was sentenced, Lee and his henchmen preyed on this vulnerability and subjected the laborers to poor conditions and minimal pay. So in March of 1999, after months of mistreatment, the workers complained about their plight and attempted to obtain food from local residents. And so they would just walk around, in the villages throughout the island and go to any family to get food. Lee retaliated by using arrest, deportation, food deprivation, and brutal physical beatings to force workers to operate in the factory. In one episode, a woman was beaten so badly that she lost an eye. This abuse continued through November of 2000. The second case that we show there is the offenders were Wang and Kuo. Wang and Kuo, both Chinese nationals, were sentenced for their roles in conspiring to force women into prostitution in American Samoa. Wang was sentenced to 62 months imprisonment, Kuo 63 months imprisonment. Those two, along with several co-defendants, operated a scheme to recruit and import Chinese women and hold them in prostitution in nightclubs and brothels here in the territory. Upon arrival, the victims who were unpaid were denied access to their passports and return airline tickets, and were denied the opportunity to leave until they had paid off increasing debts. So 5 defendants in that case pleaded guilty. 2 co-defendants, Chen and Zhang, both Chinese nationals as well, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to transport women in foreign commerce for purposes of prostitution based on their roles in the same scheme. And in August 2007, defendant Uyang Lei of American Samoa pled guilty to using intimidation and threats to persuade witnesses, in this case, to provide false testimonies during the human trafficking investigation. And so later on in late 2007, one of them was sentenced, Zhang, was sentenced to 11 months imprisonment and 3 years of supervised release, and Chen to 6 months imprisonment and 3 years of supervised release. So that was that case. Now the last one in 2013, mentioned there, that was an American Samoan man was sentenced to repeatedly raping a teenager and 2 other women he brought from the neighboring Samoa to work in his home and help care for his 9 children, threatening to send them out of the territory if they refuse his sexual advances. So he ended up he ended up serving time. I believe he still is serving time. So those are some of the cases we wanted to include those, and these were all before our legislation on human trafficking in 2014. So yeah, next slide, please. All right, so factors that make our island vulnerable to trafficking, and this is viewed from a cultural lens. So there's the cultural traditions bringing family members from Samoa to be caregivers or workers and residents. Complain saying bringing relatives from Samoa to do domestic work is a long-standing practice and should not be seen as trafficking. The other factor is immigration sponsorship. There are laws on sponsorship, and sponsors sometimes apply this to the point where it becomes power and control. And they're basically controlling everything concerning the individual that they sponsor, and can seem like sometimes imprisonment, yes. And then there's gender-based violence, where women are mostly the victims, and then few anti-trafficking efforts. Need for a more cultural approach to human trafficking to fully understand its impact here in American Samoa. Next slide, please. Okay, so we believe that to have a stronger approach on tackling human trafficking within our territory, we have to have those safe dialogues addressing our cultural belief systems and human trafficking lens. Be able to identify human trafficking even though it's a hidden crime. Build capacity and strengthen collaboration efforts, partnerships with current task forces, and creating policies and procedures of human trafficking and how to better serve victims. And also defining what training looks like for the different communities we have here in the territory. And then strengthening advocacy approach and services, as well as available services for the advocates, for service providers, whatever we can do to, because it is the job of the Alliance to bring training to the community. So whatever we can do to bring that training out into the community. So that's our last slide. Yes, I believe we're done, unless we have any questions. Cynthia, did I go over time?
Actually, we appreciate all of our partners for being with us as well. And for our attendees who are sticking out till the last presenter has presented, and that is you. Thank you so much. Folks, I know we are well past the time, and thank you everyone for sticking it out with us, because there was much to learn from each other. We do not have the numbers, but it doesn't mean that our reported cases does not mean that they do not exist here in our islands. So we have learned that our program should be culturally appropriate, that it should be trauma informed, and more importantly, we have each other as a resource. So on that note, we are reaching out to you as well to join us in this effort to prevent human trafficking in our communities as well. So without further ado, I know we've gone beyond our time. Just want to thank our caption text for sticking it out with us, and to each and every one of you for joining us. Today is the last session for our webinar, and we want to thank you, of course, for participating. As well, we want to also highlight too that we have other webinars coming on. So check us out on our website, guamcoalition.org, so that you'll be able to keep apprised of all of our activities. So on that note, thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy as well. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. But please don't forget to complete the evaluations. Your input is very valuable to us, and you will get a reminder from Zoom under my name saying, please don't forget to complete the survey if you haven't already. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Until our next uh, until our next webinar. Have a good day.